and let me know when you want me to take off. Start.
Begin.
Rockets engaged.
Yeah.
Okay.
Today is the 10th of March, 2021. This is St. Louis Unix Users Group. Welcome. We start out the session with a base introductory level kind of presentation. Tonight will be Scott Granemann. Go ahead, Scott.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. So I'm giving a little tutorial tonight about 1Password. I've been talking about it on the discuss list. And so I've volunteered to talk a little bit about 1Password and what I like about it and what the good aspects of it are. I always tell people, just use a password manager. That's the important thing, is that people actually use one. I think everybody should use one. I've trained I taught my kid when he was 10 to use a password manager, 1Password. And if he can do it, believe me, anyone can. So it's just important that you use something. Based on what we've talked about on the list, I wouldn't recommend LastPass any longer, but there's certainly plenty of other alternatives out there. I've been using 1Password for probably, 10 years, something like that. And so I've got a pretty good experience with it. And I really like the software. Everybody in my company uses it. So I think you guys will find this pretty interesting. So I'm going to share my screen. And
let me guess, you don't like using pets' names for your passwords?
I don't. How do I?
Some people just don't like fun.
But if you put 1, 2, 3 after the pet's name, it'll be long and no one will guess it.
Right. Does everybody see my desktop now?
Yes.
Yes.
Scott,
browser looking to find the password right for you.
Good,
Scott,
good,
is this slide deck going to be made available?
I don't really have slides. I made an outline. I'd be happy to share that with you guys.
Okay, fantastic.
Because I took screenshots and I was like, things update all the time. It's a waste of my time to try to turn this into slides. So I have an outline.
Okay.
I'm happy to share with you guys. So I want to start off with the fact that, yes, this is paid. There is no free version of 1Password. They have several different tiers that you can pay for. If all you want to do is get it for yourself, it's $3 a month, billed annually. So that's $36 a year. And if you do that, you get unlimited passwords, unlimited items, a gigabyte of document storage. So you can scan any document you want or images and put them into 1Password and have them available. I'm going to cover that. You got your email support. You can restore deleted passwords for up to a year. They have something called travel mode, which lets you basically turn it on and passwords disappear off your device. And then when you're past the people at customs, you can enable it, turn it off, and all of your passwords sync back. So basically, if you're worried about the government, whether ours or some other one, getting hold of all your passwords, you can disable that ability with travel mode. And of course, it supports two-factor authentication. Now, what I recommend, though, you do is look at 1Password families. This is $5 a month for a family of 5 people. And remember, your family, we are all part of the great human family. So do keep that in mind. So for $5 a month, that is up to 5 people, and they get 1Password. And by the way, no matter if you pay for just a person or a family, you get access to all the platforms that 1Password runs on. And right now, that's Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Android, and iOS. So as a family member, for instance, I have 1Password installed on my iPad, my iPhone, my Mac, and a Windows virtual machine that I have running on my Mac, and that's all allowed. If I had an Android phone, I could also install it on there. It does. So basically, as a paying subscriber, you can install it on as many devices as you want, no matter what the device is, as long as it's supported, and they support all the major operating systems. And so the family plan, you get the same features, but you get a shared vault. And I'm going to talk about vaults in just a sec. A vault is basically an area that consists of the storage of a set of passwords and data. and so on. So when you create a family, you'll have your own personal vault that only you can access. Other family members will have a personal vault that only they can access, but by default, a shared family vault is created that everyone can access. So for instance, I might put passwords that my son and Robin need access to, for instance, or trusting my 12-year-old very much, I let him have access to my credit card number, because that way, if he needs, wants to buy a couple of bucks on a game and he knows not to do any more than that, or he will live a short but eventful life, that he has access to my credit card, but he has to ask me first. But as the organizer of the family, you have the ability to invite people, manage them, recover things if they lost access to their account, and so on. The other thing 1Password offers are business plans. And you can see here that you can have a team, or it's $4 per use per person monthly, business plans, and so on. These are really about having a centralized control where you can set password limits and things like that. So an IT admin could say, okay, here's the minimum length people have to have for passwords. You get admin controls and better access to support and things like that. Things that really most families or individuals wouldn't need or desire. Now, when you get 1Password, let me go here to the home page here. Let me find where you can install it. Here we go. So you can install the apps, and there's the operating systems I said: Mac OS, iOS, Windows, Android, Linux, Chrome OS, and command line access, which I've never used. But you also install browser extensions, and they have currently support Chrome, Firefox, Edge, the Chromium version of Edge, the new version of Edge, Brave, yay, and Safari. So they support all of those. Now, if you've been using 1Password for a while and you have older extensions, I urge you to disable those and install the new extensions, because they've updated the extensions and they do more, but they unfortunately have the same name as the old ones. So the old ones are now called the classic extensions. If you go in and install them now, you get the new extensions, which I'm going to show you tonight. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up 1Password. Now, if I wanted to access it in my browser, that's right here. By the way, I'm in the demo vault, so I'm not that concerned that you guys are seeing HP Lovecraft's Visa card here and so on. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But I mentioned vaults, and sorry, this is kind of new to me too. Right over here, this is where you can see the vaults. And so I formed a family called Granemann, and that's my personal vault. That is our shared vault. And then I created a demo vault for things just like this. So if I'm going to do a demonstration, I can have things in there that I'm not afraid to show everybody. My company, WebSanity, also has an account, a team, and we have a personal vault. There's my shared WebSanity vault that all of us have access to. We have 2 extra vaults we've created, one called Warehouse for passwords that we want to keep, but we don't really need to have anymore to use. And then we've got a client's vault because we manage a lot of clients' passwords as well. So if they have a problem, they can come to us and we can help recover it for them. Now, I'm only showing you the demo vault, but notice if I clicked all vaults here, then I could search and access everything in all the vaults, which, to be honest with you, is what I usually enable. That's usually what I want. But in this case, I only want the demo vault showing. And so what I want to do, now that you know about the vaults, you can see the demo vault here. Well, if I click here, I can see all items in a vault, suggested items, and that's based on the website I'm on. For instance, it'll pay attention to the URL that you have in 1Password and the URL of the browser window you're in, and it will offer to match them, or favorites, and you can favorite them, as I'll talk about in a second. Well, what I want to show you, I'm going to go ahead and click on all items here, and you can see I've only got about 20 items in here to show you guys. Now, this is the browser app. I also want to show you the desktop app, and the desktop app is right here. And so again, I am in the demo vault now. There you go. So there's the demo vault. So the browser version of 1Password and the desktop version of 1Password and the mobile versions of 1Password all sync through the cloud. It's all secure. They have several explanations on their website. They employ cryptographers. They know what they're doing. They've never had a security incident. And so I feel really confident with these guys. They really know what they're doing. They're audited every year. So people can go through the code and verify their security. They publish white papers going into this all the time. So they do not have access to my passwords, to my secrets. So if I in fact lost everything, the master password to the entire account and things like that, I would be hosed. They cannot recover it for me, which is good. Now, when you create a new team or your own individual account, they generate a PDF for you that you're supposed to fill out with your master password and the secret key and things like that, and then copy it and put it away in a lockbox, or put it in an envelope and put it in a friend's house or something like that. So that's a good thing as well. So I'm going to close this up right now. This is all items. This is favorites. I'll talk about that. So notice they have a bunch of different categories. If you click here, this shows you a list of all the different categories of data that 1Password can store. Obviously logins, but they have a lot more: secure notes, credit cards, identities, passwords, documents, bank accounts, databases, driver's licenses, email accounts, memberships like Costco and AAA, passports, servers, which comes in handy with my company, social security numbers, software licenses, which is a great help, wireless routers, outdoor licenses, which would be your hunting and your fishing license, which I don't have, and then finally reward programs. So of these, notice I have all of these in the demo. I have not yet added outdoor license or reward program, which is why they're separate. So over here are the categories. The numbers show you how many I have in each category. So I'm going to start. Yes.
Where would an SSH key go?
An SSH key probably would go in passwords.
Okay.
That'd be probably where I would put it. Or servers. If it's an SSH key you use to access the server, you could put it there. I mean, you could put it in logins. It's not like you're forced to put things where you want, right? You could put it in secure notes if you wanted. Whatever makes sense to you is the easy answer.
Are they all going to be passwords, like 10 or 13 characters long, or are they going to be these big 6-line?
It's up to you.
SSH keys?
You can generate a 1-character password, although it will complain mightily, or store a 1-character password. You can generate up to a 100-character password if you want. Now, in one case, I'm storing a 200-character password. I generated a 100-character password, copied it out into a text file, generated a second 100-character password, took the one I'd copied, pasted it at the end, and now I have a 200-character password in there. There's no limit.
I'm thinking
they will generate up to 100, but there's no limit in terms of storage.
Private SSH key. Your private SSH key is more like what, 200 and 300 characters long?
Oh no, more than that. I mean, I usually use 4096-bit keys now, which are pretty long. They don't care.
So you can store that in this password field?
Sure.
Okay.
As I said, the password field has no limit.
Okay.
I actually asked them and they said, no, there's no limit. So, I mean, there's probably a theoretical limit, but for all intents and purposes, you don't need to worry about it.
Behind it somewhere, so there's probably, if it's text, it might be a 4 or an 8K limit, but let's face it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
By the time you actually collide with the limit on their storage capacity, it's
right.
You got other problems.
Right. And then frankly, you could put it in a secure note. In that case, I don't think there's much. I think that's just like a secure text file. So anyway, over here in logins, you can see I added 5 logins here. And so I clicked on the one for Amazon, and you can see I've created a username for HP Lovecraft, and I generated a password. Now, to log into Amazon, what I would do is I go over here to Amazon, and I click. Now, I forgot to turn off my, there you go. And so it is offering over here all of my little logins, but I'm going to click HP Lovecraft. Now, it shouldn't be showing that. I need to go in and tweak something. But I click that. I click continue. Oh, there's no account with that. I'm sorry. Right, of course, there's no account for HP Lovecraft. But what I would do is I would click that. It would take me to the next page. I would click in it. It would fill in the password for me. And boom. The other thing I can do is I can use key commands. And I can hit on my Mac, I could hit command period, or sorry, command backslash. I just installed the new one tonight, and it's not, I shouldn't have done that. But trust me, there are key commands. I shouldn't have done that. I did that an hour ago because I was like, maybe I should show them the new version. But there is a key command you can click, and it will put it in for you if you want. So anyway, I want you to notice it says, hey, there's two-factor authentication available for this service. So it actually will tell you if the service offers two-factor authentication. And if you click on that, it says, hey, do you want to scan a QR code? And so when you do, it pops this up here. Now, I generated a QR code earlier on this site. Now, this is not going to work. It's going to complain. But you would take it and hover over. Now it's going, this is not correct. This is not correct. So that's why it's doing that. But otherwise, it would detect it, and it would automatically fill in the two-factor authentication stuff here. And then, for those of you guys that have used it, I would click on something, it would insert the username and password. I would hit enter, it would take me to the next screen, and I could just click on it, and it would paste in the proper code for those 30 seconds right in for me. So in my real accounts, I definitely have put any website that supports two-factor authentication. I've set it up in 1Password, and it works perfectly without a flaw every single time. Now, I want you to notice a couple of other things. If I wanted to add this to favorites, which I've already done, I would click this button right here. So right now it is in favorites. If I click that, it's no longer in. If I click it, it goes back to favorites. Why are you being bad? There we go. Now it's in favorites right there. Okay. But notice I can do other things. If I click on this, I can have the username show up in large type if I wanted to show somebody across the room or make it easier for me to see. And one of the things I love about this is it does symbols, numbers, and characters in different colors. And you'll notice it uses a monospace font and it numbers each place, which I think is a really cool feature. If I click over here, now if I just want to copy the password to paste wherever I want, I can simply click anywhere in this line and I just copied it to my clipboard. Same thing with this. But if I click this drop down here, again, I can show it in large type. This is a really neat feature. I can view my password history. So you'll notice when I click that, you know, at first I thought, I'm going to use Linux. And then I was like, no, that's not a good password. I'll do Linux is cool. Then I was like, no, I should make it, you know, elite. And so put some numbers in for letters. And then I put Linux is cool with numbers. And then I was like, nah, screw it. I'm just going to generate a password. So I want to show you that. How do you generate a password? Well, you would click on edit and see this little button right here, this action menu. You click on it and it immediately generates a password for you of 3 choices: random, memorable, and pin. So I chose random here, and you'll notice there's 35 characters, which is my default. I generally always use 35 characters as the default when I'm generating a new random password, but you can, as I said, go all the way up to 100 if you want, or down to 8. Sorry, 8's the minimum, although you can type over it. You could type 2 if you really wanted to for some reason. I'm going to go to 35 again. Now, I like to check numbers. I do not bother with symbols, but you can do that if you want. Usually if it's 35 characters and it's capital letters, small letters, and numbers, that's good. But notice you can also do memorable passwords where it's words instead, and you can control the number of words all the way up to 15 words. Again, I usually use 4 words for that. You can have it capitalized or not. You can have it use full words or not. And you can decide what you want to go between the words. So commas, underscores, whatever you want. So there you go. That's how you would generate a password. Pretty darn easy.
Can you hide that display of the password?
Yeah, you sure can. If you go up to view conceal passwords, but here's the deal. as I explain to people, I am very aware if I open my password manager and somebody's right over my shoulder. So I don't, if somebody was over my shoulder when I was starting to open this, I'd be like, hey, get back. What are you doing here? Get back. You know what I mean? So it's easier for me just to see the password all the time. But yeah, you can conceal it if you really want. Now I'm going to click on BAS-CUS, and you'll notice it's saying, hey, you've reused that password in another entry. And if I click on this, it says, hey, you've used it in one other item. And if I click on it, it tells me, oh, it's in FooBar. So I did use the same password in FooBar and BAS-CUS. So now I know to go in and change it. So that's kind of a nice thing to let me know. If I click on Google, it says, hey, that's an unsecured website. Why? Because the website has HTTP, not HTTPS. Well, notice it will fix that for me. If I click that, it says, hey, do you want to go ahead and use 1Password is going to connect to see if you can use HTTPS. Do you want to do that? And I can say, yeah, do that for all sites. Always do that. And say, I did it, and now it's HTTPS. So you can do that if you want. Now, here's a little trick for you. The way to get around that is I just don't put the scheme in there. I just put the domain name. So instead of putting HTTP or HTTPS, I just put the domain name, google.com, amazon.com, whatever. So there you go. Let me go ahead and get that back for my next time I give a demo on this. So we'll complain. And finally, SolarWinds. As some of you guys might know, I'm a part-time admin for SolarWinds. And, I stupidly had the password of password123, and apparently we got hacked. So it tells me, hey, that's a weak password. So if only the people at SolarWinds had been using 1Password, maybe we wouldn't.
No, it wouldn't have helped.
I know.
It would have helped in the least. The problem was that they had published the password on a website on a Git site where anyone could download it. So it would have been 100 characters somebody could have snagged it because they published the password in the clearing Git.
Yeah, you get my point.
Which is why they should have been using this so they didn't have the damn password in Git in the first place.
Right. And so I'm going to go to Micro Center now. And let's say I want to create a password at Micro Center. And sure, we'll go to Brentwood and I go to create account. Now I'm going to create an account. Now I've not done this, so we'll see if this works the way it's supposed to. So I already have an account at Micro Center. I'm going to pretend I'm creating one for my son. So please don't email him. I'll put my there, and then password. And notice what it just did. When I clicked in that, 1Password says, hey, I've got a suggested password for you. And so, I could click on that and it'll use it. And then notice what it does. It offers to save a password for me. So at this point now, and notice it wants me to choose which vault. So I'm going to save it into the demo vault. And I hit save and create my profile, and 1Password created the password for me and automatically saved it into 1Password for me. And so now when I go back over here, there's Micro Center. And of course I can go in and change the password and, change it in the website and do whatever I want. But there you go. That's a pretty damn good password. But so the point is you can manually do it, which is what I normally do. Or you can tell 1Password, hey, when I'm creating new accounts, watch what I'm doing, offer to generate a password, then offer to save it into 1Password. So you can do that as well. Secure notes, I can, oh shoot, how dumb of me to show you guys my ID RSA secret key. There you go. But you'll notice secure notes are just text. So I could put oh crap, you're seeing all my secrets, the Coca-Cola recipe, or whatever I want. You can store credit cards in here. And what's cool is when you go to a place where it wants credit cards, if you click in it, 1Password detects that and offers to fill in your credit cards for you. If you have more than one credit card, like I do, it lets you switch between them. So I can choose MasterCard or Visa. You can create identities in here. And again, if you click in fields on a web browser that wants name, address, phone number, it will offer to fill them in for you. I have multiple identities normally. I have one for work, one for home, and one that's anonymous. where my name is anonymous, and I live at 123 Main Street. I usually put New York, New York with a zip code there. My phone number's 555-555-1212 and so on. So if I just want to, if I'm forced to register, but I don't want to actually give them any real information, I use my anonymous identity. You can do passwords. So like my mother had one of those secure key boxes on the back of her door on her old house. And so I stored the key box password there. My son's number to get into his phone before he broke the old phone when he was younger. That's where I would have stored that. You'll notice it's complaining about a weak password, and there's sometimes you can't do anything about it. Like on one of those little key boxes for a house, you get 4 digits. And so it's going to complain about it. Okay. Now I'm going to skip documents to go to bank accounts. And again, you can store all the bank account information you want. Notice I have void check here that I have available. Now, how did I do that? Well, you upload things into documents and then you link to them. So if I was in edit here, right, I could click link existing. And if I wanted, I could link to the Cthulhu file if I wanted to do that. And it sticks Cthulhu in here. I can remove it if I wanted, or I could just upload a new file directly into this, in which case it will also put it in documents. So why do that? Well, I like to do that for checks. I like to do it for my driver's license, so I have a copy of what it looks like. I do that with my passport. So I scan my passport, then I keep an image of it in 1Password. So if I was traveling somewhere and my passport got lost or stolen, as long as I have my phone with me, I would still have access to it, and so on. Databases, driver's licenses, which I talked about there, email accounts, and you can put whatever other fields you want in here as well, which is something I haven't talked about. On all of these, let me go back to logins rather. On all of these, if you click edit, you can create a new section. And so, for instance, you can create a section here called purchases and then track whatever information you want. It doesn't matter. Now, I do want you to notice when you create a new field, you type whatever label you want. So you could put a date, and then in the new field here, you can decide what you want that field to be. Text, URL, email, address, date, month, year, one-time password, or phone. So you can kind of adjust whatever you want there. So I could put text, I could put whatever information there I needed. If I want to delete the entire section, I click that, it's gone. Let's see, software licenses. You know, I remember helping my brother once install a new computer, and I'm like, okay, we got all the OS installed. Let's install your software. What'd you have? And he goes, well, I think I had this piece of software. And I'm like, okay, let's go install it. So I installed it. I'm like, great, where's the serial number? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, you bought it? Yes. You don't know where the serial number is? No. I'm like, search your email. And so we proceeded to have to do that for 10 different pieces of software. Well, I have every piece of software I've ever licensed stored in my 1Password. So it's very easy for me to get the license keys, keep track of when I bought it, what the order number was. So if I ever need to contact them about a problem, I can do so. So this is really handy. Wireless routers also, you can store all the information you need for a wireless router. So if I go over to your house and I'm like, hey, how do I connect to your Wi-Fi network? You tell me, it's stored permanently in my 1Password. Now, you'll notice we also have tags. So you can create tags, all the ones you want, and you can add items to those tags. So for instance, the password I had for my mom's secure lockbox, I want to add that to my mom tag. So I just take it and drag it down there. And notice it now has the tag of mom. And now it's gone from 3 to 4. I can go to edit mode and I can delete the tag, or I can add new tags right here. So let's say my mom's house was in Marshall, Missouri. And if I wanted to keep track of items in Marshall, I could do that. And now I've got a new tag for Marshall. And of course I can drag other things onto that tab or type. It doesn't matter. Now, I want to show you one of the best things about 1Password, and that's, they call it Watchtower. And this is an extra layer of security that's completely invaluable and really handy to have. So let's start with compromised websites. They use a service called Have I Been Pwned or Pawned, and it looks like this. And if you guys have never heard of this, you all should bookmark it. It is completely, totally legit. The guy that runs this is very well known in the security community, Troy Hunt. This is the premier website of its type. And it's haveibeenpwned.com. And he keeps track of data breaches. If there's a new data breach and it's available with the usernames and passwords, he downloads it and adds it to this database. So you can type your email address in and it'll come back and say, yep, these websites have had a problem. You better change your password if you haven't. The way 1Password integrates that is, it will automatically tell you if a website that's in 1Password has been compromised. And it hashes that information and it stores it locally on your 1Password. So they download the database from Have I Been Pwned onto your machine. So all the calculation is done on your machine. Nothing leaves your machine. So no one knows if you've been pwned or not, if you've been your information's on a website that's been compromised. Same thing with vulnerable passwords. It will tell you, hey, this password, and again, it's using hashes, this password has been used in a known data breach. You'd better change it, and it will then walk you through changing it for you. So that's really handy. It will tell you if you've reused passwords, so you can fix that problem. If you have weak passwords, so you can fix that. If you're on known unsecure websites because you're using HTTP, it will tell you if there's two-factor authentication available, and it will tell you if it's expiring, whether that's my passport in this case, which is not really my passport, so don't try to use that, or credit cards or things like that. So this is a fantastic built-in feature of 1Password that I think is just second to none. It's absolutely fabulous. And in fact, the Have I Been Owned guy references 1Password on his site right here, and he explains why. And it is not because 1Password pays him at all. He likes 1Password and started putting that in here on his own volition. And 1Password approached him and said, hey, can we link up with your database and copy it down into our individual users' accounts so that we can add that extra layer of security? And he said, by all means. A couple of things about the preferences I wanted to show you. It's got full preferences. So you can have it in here. Notice it detects new credit cards if you type those in, detect new passwords and usernames. In terms of security, the desktop version you can unlock with your finger. If I'm using my iPad or iPhone, I have Face ID on them, so it will unlock with my face. If you have an older device, you can use your finger to unlock as well. You can also use your Apple Watch to unlock on the Mac as well. There's the multiple accounts, as I was talking about. There's the Watchtower features. You can control, if you want, the Watchtower features or not. I think it's a good idea to do it. And it has other features as well, but those are the key ones I wanted to show you. So that is, I think, 1Password very quickly in a nutshell. I think it's been great software. My company uses it. I just want to point out that, for instance, I have over, if I go to all vaults here, you can see here that, let me close this. I have 1,713 items in 1Password, okay? And so to me, this thing is absolutely incredibly valuable because this is one of the first pieces of software I install on my computer.
That's annoying.
Absolutely. Because my whole life is in this thing. My company's life is in this thing. And so I absolutely need it there available at all times. And so I can't recommend it highly enough. I have time for a few questions.
I'll just give a pro tip. Don't store your personal passwords in a company vault because if you get let go, you won't have access to it.
Yep, that is absolutely true.
Don't ask me how I know.
Yeah. That is absolutely correct. You should. That's why you have different vaults. So that's why I would. I have my company vault and I have my personal vault.
Well, it was in my personal vault inside the company's account.
Oops.
So I thought it was personal, but then I lost access.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
That's a bad idea. Hi, Beth.
This is Stan. Question: can it import from other password vaults?
Yes, it can. Where is it? File import, and you can import from other 1Passwords, LastPass, Splash ID, and CSV files. So there you go.
What about so you mentioned
yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was muted. So you mentioned multi-factor authentication. So do sites have to be set up to work specifically with that? Because I think some like only do Google Authenticator, for instance.
No, that's BS.
Okay. Google
Authenticator uses a standard open protocol called TOTP, and that is exactly the same protocol that 1Password supports as well. So it really annoys me when I go to a website, especially Google, and they're like, download Google Authenticator. You don't need Google Authenticator at all for that. Now, Duo, which is what WashU uses, for some stupid reason, does not use TOTP. So they have their own little thing, and so you cannot store Duo generated, special two-factor authentication in 1Password. But anything that supports TOTP, which is the standard open protocol, totally works in 1Password. Does that make sense?
Yep, I got you. Thanks.
Yep.
While you all are thinking of any other questions, Scott apologized earlier, but he does have someplace else he has to go quickly this evening. So he did say that
5 more minutes.
Okay.
So if anybody has any questions.
He said he'll be checking the discuss list and respond to any comments or questions there later. So, but could continue with the questions, anyone?
Go ahead.
2 questions.
Yes.
Number 1, what don't you like on it? And number 2, what does it not have that you wish it did?
I don't know. I've been very, very, very happy with it. I mean, I know some people are going to complain about paying, but I don't have a problem paying for software that I use all the time. This software works every single time. I manage my business with it, my personal life. It has saved me so much time and energy. I know you guys all know people reuse passwords, and this allows me not to. So I actually have unique passwords for virtually every single site. And so I have gotten those letters or emails saying, I'm sorry, our site got hacked. Don't forget to change your password on other sites. And I'm like, I don't need to, because I have a unique password on your site. So I don't care if anybody got it, because it didn't going to work anywhere else. So I'm happy to pay them, especially because in my mind, $5 a month for an entire family of people is a steal. That's not even
what would it cost you if somebody ripped off a password, or something for your credit card? I mean, it's cheaper than what it costs you to deal with the problems.
One more time?
It is so much cheaper to pay for the product than pay the cost of having one of your accounts. I mean, if you woke up tomorrow morning and your bank account was empty, you'd be annoyed.
Right, of course, or worse. Yeah, I mean, it's saved us. It's like I said, I can't quantify all the times it saved me because I don't know, right? But
you have to.
For me, again, spending $5 a month is I see no reason not to. That just is ridiculously cheap for all that I've gotten with it. So I don't have really a complaint. And their thing is they do constantly update it. They are constantly working on this. This is not one of those things where they take the money and then, we're done. They are constantly working on it, constantly tweaking things, adding new features. as I said, you can go on they're audited every year. You can go on their website and read all their security white papers and everything. So yeah. Sorry, I can't give you an answer like, well, this sucks about it, because I don't have anything I really don't like. Anybody else?
Export, this is Stan.
Yeah.
Can you export the data to a hard copy somewhere?
Yes.
CVS.
You could export it to 1Password interchange, a CSV, or tab delimited text.
Great. Thank you.
You could do that and print it. Absolutely. That's a good question. I should have mentioned import and export. That is absolutely true.
Want to print that on yellow Post-it notes.
Guys,
yeah, guys.
what I recommend you do if you're going to switch, so if you've had bad password habits up to now, what I recommend you do is this. I imported everything into 1Password years ago, and then I said, I'm going to work on 10 a night. And so I didn't want to sit there for 12 hours and change passwords and get burnt out. So I said, I'm going to do 10 a night until they're all done. And what I did was I started with the money ones. So banks, Amazon, things like that. I started with those. And then I slowly worked my way through the important ones to the less important ones. And gradually over time, I got to the point where it was done. And so that's what I would recommend if you're going to do any password manager. You know, import your stuff and then don't try to kill yourself doing it all at once. Take some time. Anybody else? No? All right. Well, if you guys got questions, I'm on the discuss list, and I will export my little outline and I'll put it up there for you guys so you can see it.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you
guys.
very much, Scott Granemann from Web Sanity,
have a
long-time member and frequent speaker here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stop the sharing
now.
Okay, bye. Bye.
Bye. This is Gary Meyer. I'm our MC for this evening. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our setup, we usually do this as 2 talks, the basic tutorial talk, which is what Scott just did. At the end of the evening, we have our main feature presentation. And in between, we do announcements and a general question and answer session, mostly about Unix, Linux related type things, computer things in general. You can really ask anything you want, but unless it has something to do with computers, there's probably not much chance we're going to come up with an answer. So with that, let's see, announcements. Stan or Lee, do we have any particular announcements that we need to make?
Can't think of it, Gary.
The only announcement I can think of is next Thursday night is the monthly St. Louis Linux Users Group meeting, the LUUG. The topic for this month is local Kubernetes. Is that correct, Lee?
That's correct.
Okay.
Sorry, Gary, you keep catching me muted. Yes, that's correct.
All righty.
We sent you a, hang on a second. I got the full title here if you want it. Local Kubernetes for Dummies. This presentation will serve as an intro to setting up and using a local instance of Kubernetes, moving beyond Docker and Docker Compose for local development work into more advanced tools like Helm.
Cool. So that will be next Thursday night. Starting time for that meeting is 6:30. And unlike tonight, it's only a one topic meeting. And so the announcements and Q&A will be right there at the front at the 6:30 time frame. As with this, it's free. So invite anyone you know who might be interested in the topic or interested in Linux in general. Everybody's welcome. Speaking of everybody, there's a couple names I don't recognize, and certainly you're welcome this evening. We are kind of curious as to where you may have heard about this. So you can either open your mic and just tell us where you found out, or you can put it in the chat. You can either direct it to everyone, or if you want to just direct it to me or Stan, that's fine too. Stan just always likes to kind of track where people found out about us. So anybody new or who hasn't been here, let us know where you came from.
Hey Gary, this is Zamir. I work with Steven. So basically he invited me to the group. So just
Hello.
Hey Steven.
Fantastic. Well, welcome, Zamir.
Yeah,
You're always welcome.
Nice meet. Oh, thank you so much. Nice meeting you guys. It's a pleasure.
Great. Let's see. Anything else? Stan or Lee, you see anything on the calendar or anything else that needs to be pointed out?
I'm having trouble. This is Stan. I'm having trouble sharing my screen. I'd like to point out that this meeting's recorded, as always. Anybody actually can record the meeting, so there's no privacy on the internet. What goes on in Las Vegas comes up on the internet. And it really does. I'd like to mention that this recording will probably, in a couple of days, will be posted up on our main site. There'll be a link in the archive sections on the lower right hand corner of the screen for a desktop. Ooh, a calendar.
Ooh, neat.
Yeah. So what's interesting, Gary?
Wow. Let's see. I really didn't have anything on the calendar that I really wanted to point out. So anyone else see anything interesting, you're welcome to point it out. Actually, the one thing that occurs to me, and I believe it's something like April the 26th, and this is kind of odd. It's not pure computers, but so much of what we do is based on radio stuff, whether it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. And so the first radio station west of the Mississippi is WEW. It was started by St. Louis U, and its 100th anniversary will be April the 26th. And no, as far as I know so far, we don't have any particular celebration planned, but maybe we'll get something together in the next 6 weeks or so.
It's actually funny you speak about celebrations. I don't know if you heard about the 2 antennas that got married.
No, tell us.
Oh, come on. You got to know that one. The ceremony wasn't great, but the reception was wonderful.
Wah, wah, bump. And that's the other reason why people come to these meetings is the incredibly bad jokes.
That got at least a chuckle. It counts.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, if anybody else thinks of an announcement in the next couple of minutes, speak up. In the meantime, we'll open it up to general Q&A. So anybody have any questions of any kind they'd like to pose to the group or comments?
What is the price of tea in China? No. Oh. Why doesn't this damn thing work?
Time changes this Sunday.
Good enough.
Yeah, but our phones do it automatically, so it's kind of nice.
I thought we weren't going to do that this year.
Dreams.
I wish we'd give it up completely, one way or the other.
Well, how's it really going to affect things this year?
It makes no sense. That's why we must keep doing it.
Oh, yeah. Good argument right there.
If it made sense, I mean, let's face it. Anything that costs everyone money is really annoying. It just has to be continued. I mean, that's the trick. You have to find out why it wouldn't make sense, then we got to do it. If you show that there's a perfectly good reason for it, then we'll have to stop. Easier said, of course, but.
I have not, embarrassingly enough, I haven't read up on it, but there was that announcement, was it late last week, the multiple websites that were hacked or something about Microsoft.
Oh, the Exchange servers?
Yeah, is that it? Okay.
Yeah, patch them now if you haven't already. Your advice I saw. Let's see. There's I have also not seen that much, but this YouTuber I watch, he's got a thing going through just all of it. Basically, they were able to install a web shell remote access tool on basically any Exchange server, any and everyone.
Yeah, going back to Exchange Server 2010. So every one, 2013, 2016, and 2019.
Why are we still running? Yeah, why are we still using Exchange servers 2010?
Yeah, I mean, excuse the question, but again, if technology is ineffective, it must be continued.
Because it costs more to Yeah, I'll stop talking.
Honest question, does anyone remember how many serious zero-day exploits on Exchange there have been?
I can't count that high.
I mean, show me a year that there hasn't been a hole in it. We still keep using it. Anyway, let me see if this works.
Oh, this is Stan. I did have one more question. Google Plus, is that dead or dying, or isn't there a deadline at the end of this month? You have to get your data off of Google Plus if you want to keep it, or something like that.
I think you might have missed it by a year.
Yeah, I thought it was dead already.
Well, I went into it yesterday and it was still there.
Yeah, well,
but it doesn't do us any good because we don't know the password for the doggone thing.
Well, then don't worry about it. See, it'd
be kind of nice to pull.
Vault and be done with it.
It would be nice to pull the stuff off and put it in our archives someplace else, or up on YouTube or whatever.
You can't recover the password?
I don't know who has the doggone thing.
Yeah. Oh, you don't know which email is attached to it.
Right.
Ooh. Yeah, that's bad.
I think it was set up by Andrew Latham, but I haven't been able to contact him for about a year.
Oh, lovely. There is a way with Google to recover your account if you have a lost email. You have to answer. There's a way to contact them and say, that the original email that this thing was done with is no longer accessible.
If we don't know what it is.
But you don't have to. Then you say that's no longer accessible and you put a new one in. You have to go through a fairly drawn out procedure, but it's worth trying once if you want to.
Okay.
You can try and go through it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they've got a procedure, and Amazon's is actually probably the most recoverable, but Google's got a way to get back in if you lose access to the email that was the original recovery contact. You can restore the contact from there.
Now, here's an oxymoron. I just happened to be clicking around on our webpage, and I ended up under the affiliated users groups. And I clicked on the Free Software Club of Kirksville, which happens to be spelled FSCK.
Yeah.
But when you click on it, you get a Microsoft page. Oh, wow.
Oops.
Oh, wow. And the old low lug goes off into DNS land somewhere.
Well.
Hey, Stanford, you're welcome to join with the the sysadmin group here and fix all that stuff.
Yeah, feel free.
And although that's true, we do appreciate just being pointed out where problems exist. So we know even if. So.
We've got all these chiefs and no Indians.
I just thought the Kirksville one was most unique because that's their problem.
Well, yeah, it's easier to solve when you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it still answers to DNS. It just puts up a very suspicious page.
Oh my. Well, I kind of know a little bit of the background there because that group was started when my godson was going there. So for a while, the LUUG in Kirksville did kind of stay in contact with us, and a few of their members would come to our meetings, and but that's been close to 10 years ago, and I've not heard anything from them for many years. So I have no idea if it's still student run or if they've turned it over to somebody else or what the current situation is.
What was the Missouri open source Linux users group?
Back in the days when every neighborhood seemed to want to have their own user group, and we had the old Monroe LUUG, the St. Charles LUUG, the downtown LUUG at one point. The most LUUG was originally located in Kirkwood on Lembark or Kirkwood Road.
Okay.
And later it moved to South Lembark, restaurant down there. And basically it was just a group of guys who wanted yet another meeting. Just couldn't, those are the days where we just couldn't get enough beer and pizza.
Well, that's pretty good reason to meet.
Yet another schism.
Yep.
That was at Culpeppers. That's the reason we went. It was a good restaurant.
Yeah. And so, yeah, as it just kind of, it's the old thing. Everybody's gung ho in the beginning, and we want to do it our way, and and then eventually it's, oh God, somebody has to come up with a topic, or somebody has to, actually publish it. We're going to meet next week, and it's like, yeah, fine, put it on the SLUUG website, and
so, you guys will take care of it.
But it lasted quite a few years. I don't know.
This fresh feet.
6-8 years. So
anyway.
All righty. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go on to our features talk for the night. Stephen Lembark of Workhorse Computing is a frequent speaker with our group, member of our group.
Anytime you're desperate, you call me.
Well,
hey Steve, the phone rings and it's like,
do I ever call just to see how Stephen's doing? By the way, Stephen is no longer here in St. Louis. He and his wife moved, what was it, 2.5 years ago now, Stephen?
No, we moved here about 9 months ago.
Okay.
I haven't lived in Pittsburgh very long.
Okay.
So yeah, we're out in the land of steel or whatever it is here.
Mm-hmm. But you left St. Louis about 2.5 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, we left a few years ago, and I've lived in a few places since then.
Okay.
In any case, so apparently Gary was desperate enough. So tonight we get hypers and gathers and takes. Has anyone here dealt with Raku? I know a lot of people here have played with Perl. Don't all talk at once. Okay, so this will be a new experience for everyone. Just about everyone here has seen Perl before.
I've looked into Perl sticks, but I've never really used it. But I find a lot of these ideas exciting, so that's why.
Well, Raku's kind of interesting. There was Perl 5 is where we added modules and extended a lot of things in the language, most of which have been absorbed by other languages too. It's interesting. And then there was a thing, well, it's time for the next generation of the language. So we started Perl 6. And after 10 years, what came out was a really neat product that wasn't Perl anymore. If you leave enough people in a room for long enough, they came up with a completely new language. So Perl 7 is supposed to come out next year, and it's going to be what Perl 6 was supposed to be. And Raku's its own language now. And it's 2020 hindsight on what makes Perl work and why people like it and don't, and what's really evolved in the last 30 years. You think back to the beginning of Perl 4 when it was the Camel book was first written. Nobody knew what dynamic languages were. There was C. How many people here still remember the C journal? Well, we still live with a lot of programming mistakes that were made because that's the way we did it in C. So this is just a look. No one's going to, don't bother and follow along and take notes, but it gives you an idea of why Raku is a different language. And I think especially in this case, for processing large amounts of data, it's nice. It's got the kind of structures you need in it to get things done. And again, this is going to be applying Raku. I'm not going to be going into a lot of the details of the syntax. The docs.raku.org site is excellent. You've got a language that was written by a linguist. So the documentation actually applies. It's well organized. Even the error messages in Raku are good. But the thing I'm going to be describing now is called the nr.gz, a nice long descriptive name that comes out from the National Institute of Health. Every week they update it. And it's a list of every unique, supposedly unique, hopefully unique, amino acid sequence for anything anyone's ever seen on the planet. So it's large, 1/8 of a terabyte, with 250 million sequences in it. And the sequences range from very, very short to very long, like hemoglobin has got hundreds and hundreds of bases in it. So the question is it really unique? And that's important because NIH really, it takes all this data in from everyone and it trusts what everyone says they think about the sequence. And people sometimes mislabel the same sequence 2 different ways. And that matters because when people are doing searches for things to find a disease or a cure, and they want to find all the places that something matches, you want to find every place that mice and octopus and people look the same so you can test. You get the wrong answer if there are duplicates in here. So as a hobby of mine, I started when I worked for a bioinformatics company, was the question of how do I validate that this monster is unique? Now it starts out with what's called FASTA format, BLAST format. The FASTA format was designed by biologists, and they prefix each thing with an arbitrary amount of text followed by a new line. And then you have a bunch of sequence data and then a greater than, and the end of file ends your last sequence. So you can't just walk down this looking for greater thans because you'll get an empty sequence at the beginning and you'll miss the last sequence at the end. So parsing this thing isn't always trivial. The other problem is there's that many sequences. If I can compare them at a kilohertz, it only takes 33 something or others. What are they, a billion, trillion, gazillion? I mean, by the heat death of the universe, I'll tell you if last week's was fine and I can start on next week's. So I've got to find ways of not just comparing these strings because they're huge. Now, people tell you, we've all done this. You SHA it, right? It works for Git. It works for everything. You just compute the digests for all of them. The problem is if I use SHA 512, I get hundreds of collisions in this file. It is so large. And it's an interesting thing about the SHAs. They depend on having a certain amount of information. There are only 20 amino acids. So I'm using a byte, 255 alternatives, to store 20 items throughout this file.
Dave.
There isn't enough entropy in it to actually make the digests respond because so much of it's just zeros. It's all the same values.
Hello, Steve.
Hello.
Your slides aren't changing.
Oh, that's interesting. They're changing on this.
It's comparing sequences.
You guys are not seeing the slides change?
Now they are.
Now they are.
Now they are. Now they are. Thanks, Zoom.
Yeah.
Are the slides changing? Are people seeing the slides change? Say yes or no.
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 I think
it changed from one. Yeah, basically you scroll down to the 11th slide.
We see you're editing the slide, not the slide viewer.
Yeah, but if I do this.
Yeah, that's what we don't see.
You don't see anything.
Nope.
Oh, that's cute. Let me try one quick thing.
Not that we don't see anything, nothing new comes up.
Yeah, well, which doesn't really help much. Let me try something else here. We can try the experiment of file.
I'm guessing that when you click slideshow, it opens a new window, and that's not.
No, it doesn't. It just expands. It's supposed to just expand the current one.
No, it's a new window, and you're not sharing that window.
Can you share the screen instead?
Yeah, well, I was going to just do it inside the browser.
Just stay in the editor and let us see the slides.
Okay, well, I'll restart it. That's odd. Let me just do one very, very quick thing. Because this has worked in the past.
This is Stan. I see absolutely nothing on my laptop, and I see the slides sort of change on my desktop.
SLUUG pane, share. So I want to stop sharing, and then I want to share my screen, and let's just share the entire screen for the moment. So you guys should see my screen, right? Are you guys seeing things?
I do on one desktop,
yes.
but not the laptop.
It's good now. It's more, slides are changing now.
Lovely. Well, anyway, SHA doesn't work because you get too many collisions. So what ends up happening is I've got to actually compare things. What I found out works is if I skip all the headers, I extract sequences, and I can generate two outlets. If I look at an identifier, a row ID, and I take the length of a sequence and its digest, the collision rate is small enough that I can compare the remaining sequences. So at that point, what I do is I have to walk down the file once, generate a length and a digest for everything, save it, save the sequences as literal so I can compare them, and then I do a merge and compare the collisions. So looking at reading this thing, there's no good way to do threaded reading on this because the individual sequences have different sizes. You can't read them by block. Most of them are larger than a file block, so you can't do it by page. So splitting the file up, you'd say, okay, so you split the file into 100 things and do it in parallel that way. This gives you an idea of what I'm dealing with. This shows you the size of the gzipped and the xz file. So the xz is about 51 gig, but it takes 110 minutes to cat it to dev null. It takes 41 minutes to gzip minus d it. So it's worth dealing with the larger size on the gzip. But if I tried to split the file, it would take me hours. Just reading through the file takes a long time. And this is on a reasonably high-end machine. It's a super micro with 4-lane NVMe controllers on it. So the reads are about as fast as they're going to get. So it is a problem trying to do this. So what I end up with is a single stream reader, and then I can block the input out, put multiple chunks of sequence together, and then deal with worker threads. And I can, if we were in a room, I could see everyone cringing, but worker pools, people have played with that. And, doesn't everyone just love semaphores? Managing those and IPs, data pipes, and forget it. So what I'm going to show you now is that what I can do this in Raku with very little pain and parallelize the whole thing. I can read very quickly. And I can process the file in not much more time than it takes to actually gzip it. So, there's one approach that I got out off of the docs site for concurrency And this is something that's great for websites and things. You can have a sequence hand, you can have a channel, everyone subscribes to it, there's a channel object, there's subscription objects, you read from the subscription object, it hands you stuff. There's, you know, if one of them goes down, everyone else, you know, everything gets resent. It's beautiful, and it is horribly slow for processing this much data. It just doesn't work. The latency and the bookkeeping just deep six the whole process. So what I end up with is the Dr. Seuss approach. I use a gather and a take to pull in data. I use lazy loops to process it, and then I use a map with races to actually generate the digests and write things out to separate files. And that's what I'm going to show you now. The first step, before, you know, I got to read something, and that's the input format. I have to chunk this data by stripping out headers, and I want to be able to read multiple sequences at once so that I've got a big enough chunk of data that it's worth passing off to a thread. So looking at Raku, one of the things that everyone goes crazy with are all the libraries that are used for handling long options and short options and how do you process the options. Raku actually makes it pretty easy. If you look at this sub, if there's a main sub in a shebang, it'll be dispatched automatically. If not, you get to pick however it executes. So this unit of this compilation unit is a subroutine called main, and you can see it's got 3 arguments in it. There's a path and some threads and a chunk size. And one of them's an IO path. The :d say that things will be coerced, so I can read a string in from the command line and get a real integer. If what you hand me for the threads is my mother the car, it's not going to like that very much. The other great thing about this is if I put something in that doesn't work, Raku will actually generate a pretty reasonable usage message from the signature of the main. It'll say, I'm sorry, threads has to be an integer. So I've got all these. The equal signs tell me that these are defaults, and I can decide how large to read it. The chunk sizes are actually powers of 2. So most of the stuff here is done in 8 to 16 megabyte chunks. So the way this works, Raku takes the program variable, takes a dir name, creates an IO out of it, and adds something onto the end. Dots, which don't show up too well in red on here, are method calls in Raku. So it looks like Java. It looks, you know, people won that battle. The arrows went away. So if you used to Perl, you're going to be looking at, wait a minute, I'm not adding strings together. These are method calls. The IO, by putting the name of a class in, you get a constructor. So this takes something, grabs its directory name, which is a string, passes it to the constructor for IO, passes it to IO's add method, and tacks that onto the end of it. Another thing, if you used to Perl, sigils probably make sense, but these things are twidgels. I remember they're between a sigil and a variable. And the star just says that this is something that's pre-instantiated. So program is just the path to my running program. I can use it to get the compilation unit. I can use it, in this case, to just get the path. In this case, you'll see that \root in red. One of the interesting things about Raku is it does support functional programming if you like it. So root is a value. I believe you, Gary. Root is a value. If I attempt to modify it, it's a compile time error. It's not that it's a constant variable and something about the variable's type is going to check it when I modify it. No one's overloaded the equal. If there's anything in the program with that as an L value, it blows up in compilation. So again, I can set a root value, which I don't modify. And again, I take a program, add out to it, clean up the path to strip out the dots and double slashes and everything else. Another great, kind of a nice thing is this width. With this, a lot of times you'll find this in code. You want to have a local variable that just lasts for a block. So what width says is take something and assign it to a local variable that just goes away at the end of it. So what I'm doing is taking the base name of the root And because dot got used up for method calls, tildes are catenates. So I'm going to take the base name and I'm going to stick a dot onto the end of it. I'm going to call that variable match. Now, notice there's no sigil on root. It's a value. It's sigil-less. You have to do a little more work to interpolate it in strings, but right now it's there. Catenate. The assignment operator is dash greater than, so it looks a little like R if you're used to that. People make fewer mistakes with that than double equal mistakes. Now, the postfix 4 iterates $_ of unlinked, so it's sort of like Java Lambda-ish, I guess. What I'm doing is I'm going to iterate a variable, and I'll unlink whatever it is. And I'm going to take all of the stuff that I would have generated using a directory scan that looks like the name of this program, and I'm going to delete it so I don't have any stale data. So this little block here in really 2 statements and some curly braces is the generic clean up everything that matches this file name function. Now, one of the other things is, and you look here, I've got these parens down here. If people are used to, in functional programming or in OO programming, a lot of times you add a lot of parentheses around things because you're calling things with this isn't Lisp, folks. So one of the neat things in Raku is the colon operator. If you put a colon, it says that everything left to the end of statement is the argument for whatever's in front of the colon. So this for loop is taking, for the root dir name, run this test, and it saves me a lot of parentheses. So this, again, to me, it looks a little bit cleaner because I can see what I'm doing. In fact, at that point, the semicolon's even optional because it's the last statement in the block. So now I got to figure out.
Oh, Stephen.
Yeah.
Where was the colon?
It's the red thing, right? Oops. Yeah, I can't poke on the screen with this. See right where the cursor is?
Oh, there it is. Okay. All right.
There it is.
By
so
way,
what I did is
I had interpreted the line above it that with Lisp that just you're making a smiley face and it's a joke.
Well, it is. So anyway, I down here we get the colon. Now another thing I wanted to be able to do is this file might be gzipped, it might be bzipped, it might be xz'd. So I've got a switch here. So given localizes an argument to $_. I think a lot of people may have seen the switch in Perl 5. It was taken from Raku. So given a path, I'm going to do a smart match on it. In this case, they're all regexes. So I'm going to compare it to the regular expression, literal period with a GZ. And if there's default, I don't know how to process this thing and give up. So, and it actually sounds like the way you say it. That's switching. Maybe when you're talking, you say it. I don't say, hi, let's switch on a bottle of beer and case a glass, But give it a path when it matches GZ, do something. Gathers are another interesting thing. Gathers save you from the funny return value of blocks and figuring out how to make sure that the last thing in a block is the value you want to see outside of it. Wherever you put a take inside of a block, the gather will get it. So this is the moral equivalent of that local variable array equals empty and push stuff onto the array and hand the array back at the end. All that crap goes away. It's taken care of under the hood. So I could have nested function calls 42 levels deep. Anyone that does a take inside of this block after the gather is going to put it back out into extract. Now I know this is only going to hand one thing back, so I can slap it onto a scalar and get away with it. But that extract up there, the gather is going to get the result of gzip or bzip or xcat. Another nice thing, this is Perl-ish, so it's easy to execute things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run. I pick my extractor. I have a path, so I'm going to extract it. The colon out says, make sure that you save standard out of this thing because I'm going to want it instead of just closing it. And by doing the dot out, I extract it. So that dumps the result of extracting this. It gives me a file handle that gets mapped onto input. I didn't show you this before, but with has an option. If the result of with is undef, if it would have to assign undefined to the input, you get the else. So this is the generic do something with a file handle or puke. And it saves you from all the funny logic of open the file handle or die. And it just, anything inside the block after with knows that that input is defined. It's a valid file handle. Otherwise, you're in the else block and you're done with it. I think this looks cleaner than trying to do it, you know, all the little if nested else and ors and all the rest of it. The problem I found with this is it looked like a memory leak. Run, we found out I didn't have memory leaks in my code. Run over buffers its input. It tries to read as much as it can and only pass off what's necessary. And it tried to read the entire 128 gig file all at once. I've got 128 gig of RAM on the machine, but it wasn't what, you know, it wasn't very effective. So for smaller things, run is the way to do it. For larger things, I needed to find another way, which turned out to be named pipes. So it gets a little bit lost. I do a gather. So I take a program name and create a read.p. I generate a path to a pipe, and I call that sanity. Well, if the file handle is sane, it's readable, it's writable, it's executable, I take it. The cute thing I want to show you here is the take doesn't have to be the last thing in the block. If you're used to Perl, do blocks, the last thing is what you return. I can put that take anywhere. So I can take the sanity and then say something afterwards. So now another thing I can do is run shell. Shell, it's unlike run, it doesn't give me all of the little niceties for inputs and outputs and standard errors. It just says fork exec this and keep going. So I'm running shell with my command. Start creates a thread. That is what it takes to create a thread in Raku. You put start and you run it. Okay, that is a threaded reader right there, or a threaded handler. So now I've got a copy of gzip or bzip or whatever I wanted running in the background. So now I got to read from it probably, right? So I open my pipe. The :r, what are the things in Raku? Like Perl, parentheses are usually optional. And colons are arguments. That was actually a convention. You saw a lot of things in Perl. The use arguments for different modules would be colon something. So colons are used as arguments. Another interesting thing about Raku is a side thought. Raku is UTF clean. There's one thing called an atomic int that does auto up. It's written in assembly, so you don't need to lock it. It just uses atomic assembly processes. It actually has an atom sign for the variable, for the name of the class. So :r, things don't have to be words. You can have variables with dashes and Chinese in them if you want. So I'm going to open a pipe to input. If I can't, I fail. And then I can process the input. Everyone inside the with block knows that that input's defined. It's usable. One thing to remember, Raku, unlike Perl, it doesn't automatically close files. So there's a cleaner way I can show you to do things later, but for something like this, the best way to do it is I'm inside the block, I just have to do a close. But again, I'm on the side of the block where I know it's defined, so it's closable. Now, say, which also Perl 5 borrowed, say, by the way, sticks a new line on the end of whatever it is. So you don't have to worry about adding new lines and all the rest of it. Chunks. I just want to say something every so often. And what I'm going to do is start a loop. Loops are interesting things. They just run forever. It's like a for semicolon. So start is a thread. Loop is continuous. This is going to loop forever, sleeping 5 seconds and telling me how many chunks I processed. So that is just going to dump out to the screen every 5 seconds. Just tells me if I'm making progress, if the whole thing is stalled or not. But again, that's how hard it is to do threading in Raku. You just start something. Now, my problem here, if chunks are too small, I finish processing them before I can read something and set up a new thread. So there's a balance between too large and I am overusing memory, and too small and I can't keep up. So one option I came up with originally for this was pretty obvious. You read up until the beginning of a line, you take one of these sequences and pass it off. And there was too much threading overhead. I couldn't read fast enough. So what I ended up happening was I used fixed size buffers. The buffers that work pretty well are around a few megabytes. So what I do is the native read size in Raku is 64K. So I do multiples of that. Now, the trick there is if you read fixed chunks and you've got variable with records, you've got to deal with a trailing portion of a record that's left over for the next read. So you have to adjust the end of the chunk. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But what I do is I read from a chunk. I take a read count, which is basically my chunk size divided by the read bytes. So for run to a number, I read something. Trick is the reads, because Raku is so UTF clean, when you read the thing, it doesn't assume they're characters. After you're done reading, you then decode it. ASCII's pretty low overhead. It just says, okay, take it as is and passes it off. But I could decode this as UTF-8, 16, Chinese, Latin, whatever. I don't know how many ways to decode things. But it makes it very easy to read things and then process them. Again, if the chunk, the tilde equals is concatenate equals, so I keep adding to my chunk. And if I've got end of file, I'm probably done reading. Does this look reasonable to most people? Does anyone who has a heartbeat say hello? Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, so we have at least 2 heartbeats. 3 people I haven't killed yet. Okay, then you got to keep watching until you die, man. Honest question: is this reasonably readable? Take a chunk, read it, decode it.
This part is.
Okay. Well, another thing, now what I've got is this. The next problem I get is because the chunks don't align with the records, I've got to preserve the tail end of something that starts the next chunk. So state variables in Raku are like statics in C. You initialize them, you declare them once, and they don't reinitialize on every entry into the subroutine. They keep their value. So what I can do is I can start by saying, okay, I know where it is that I started reading in a chunk. So I know where the offset for this chunk begins. And I can save the trailing edge of whatever I read last time for the next use. So now what I do, instead of setting chunk to nothing, I set it equal to whatever next is, which is obviously empty the first time. The second time I pass through here, I'm going to catch the trailing edge of the last chunk and then keep going. So read the stuff. This isn't a lot of code, but if I remember, given passes things through a switch, so given the number of characters I read, if I compare that to the chunk size, I know that I've got a complete thing. So if I find the last greater than in the file, that's the beginning of the record that potentially overflows the end of the record. Did that make sense? I can't see if people are going cross-eyed because I'm looking at the screen.
So where does the win, what is the win looking at here? Is that the chunk char?
$_. Well, given the chunk characters, which is the number of characters in the chunk, when the chunk characters numerically match chunk chars, I read a complete chunk.
Okay, so
when
it's the argument to the given then. Okay.
So think about this. Given a bottle of beer, when I have a glass, I'll pour it. Right? So it's given something when it matches. So when chunk.chars matches the total number of chunk chars, when I read a full chunk, I do the old C-ish thing. I find the last offset. The trick is if I take a substring of 1 past that, every one of the records will have a trailing greater than on it. So I can use these as trailers instead of as leading it. So I can read up to the next greater than, and it'll behave as if it's an end of record. That's where that one, that's where this 1 plus comes from. When the chunk characters are 0, I didn't read. There was nothing to read. There was nothing left over. There's nothing left to process. So I can say incomplete. Puts another way to do a say that cleans up its output better. And the default, if it isn't a full chunk, if it isn't 0, there's one case I get a partial chunk, is the very last read from the file. I've got a next, and I may not have a full chunk of data. So I'll tack whatever it is. But that case, I'm not going to have this embedded greater than. I'm going to have that bare sequence stuck on the end of there. So I'm going to stick 1 on for the fun of it. And that means that all of my processing can always assume that greater than is a terminator, not a prefix. So it simplifies the processing a lot.
I had this problem today when I was cut and pasting Perl code out of an example. You've got a forward-leaning single quote and a backward-leaning single quote. So if I cut and paste this in my text file, is that going to work?
Forward-leaning and backward-leaning quotes depends on how they're translated. Those may have just been display characters. Normally, those would just be a single quote.
Well, the quotes that you've got.
This is formatted. Okay, this is formatting from the font that I used. Those are single quotes.
Yeah, and it was really annoying when I cut and it was straight double quotes and backward leaning double quotes, and I cut and pasted it into my file. And
and they had used a pair of open quotes as a pair of single quotes as an open double. Ouch.
I'm trying to understand, trying to see that with your eyeballs and say they look like opening and closing double quotes. What's going on here? Well, the closing double quotes weren't double quotes.
But you read it in binary. What are you wasting your time for?
I cut.
Just learn to process ASCII on the screen. But these are a little easier to read sometimes. That's just the font that I picked for this. If I can find one that's equally readable elsewhere that doesn't have those, I'll probably won't use them. But one thing you notice here is this given, oops, I'm sorry. Notice here these takes. There's a gather that calls these. The take doesn't have to know where that gather is. Down here in the bowels of this thing, I just take whatever is the right thing. I take a piece of input, or I take the input with that tacked on the end of it. But otherwise, the great thing about this is I don't have to know who's using this or where they get it. It just gets passed back. So the gather and take makes programming a lot easier for this kind of thing, because wherever you need to take it, you can, and the gather just calls whatever does the taking, and they can be a lot more disconnected. And it helps clean up the code, because I can take these here and be done with it, and then add some messages onto the end of it and not have to worry. Another neat thing about Raku, subs are lexically defined. So if I have an open pipe here with the braces, this read chunk is local to these curly braces. It's not globally defined just because it's a subroutine. Every set of curly braces is a complete lexical scope for anything you define in it. You can make things public, but you don't have to.
On the take, so the take is a prepare to return this. It does not execute the return.
The take, what the take does, the take pushes a promise into the gather.
Yeah, and if you
it's under the hood, you can just think of it as the gather prepares a list, and any take that's in the scope of that gather knows how to push onto that list.
Oh, and so if there's multiple takes, there'll just be multiple pushes onto the list.
Yeah. In this case, because they're in different alternates, it'll take this one or it'll take that one, but not both. I could have 6 takes in here in a row, and I just get 6 things added onto the list.
Okay.
Whatever you take gets taken, it gets gathered. So in this case, this loop runs 45 times. The gather is going to return 45 chunks of data. Each time the loop passes through here, every time it hits the take just hands it back to the gather. The gather doesn't know where the stuff was taken or how. The take doesn't know where the thing is gathering. They are completely separate in your code, which is really convenient for programming this stuff. But I don't have to worry about holding a variable around and returning it at just the right place or all right. It just, wherever I need to, take it. You're done. And one thing is, for example, a given and a when don't have a return. I can't say when something and set it equals. You don't need it because I can do a gather of a given, and Dr. Seuss aside, it'll whatever gets taken, it gets gathered. You're done with it. So the subs, one interesting thing, everything in Raku is an object. So a signature is an object. You can actually query the signature for what kind of arguments do I expect. They define the arguments and the return type. So in this case, read chunk takes nothing because it's really a closure on this input value. It doesn't need to be passed anything. If I tried to call read chunk with an argument, I'd get a compile time error. And it returns truth. Now, one of the interesting things is this Boolean won't coerce anything. So I actually have to return a Boolean. If I return the wrong type, Raku will tell me, which actually I think is kind of good, because if you return something that makes no sense, if I return something that has no way to be Booleanized, I should know it before I get out of the subroutine, not in the caller space. So this, which is not that much code, is a complete chunked input handler that will handle any arbitrary type of thing. I mean, other than having a hardwired end of chunk with the greater than, if I passed in the separator, this would break up anything, tabs, greater thans, new lines, I don't care. This will break it up into that many and give you a chunk of as many read units as you want. Now, gather accumulates this thing. It's a gather in a loop. Loops run forever. My data is not infinite. It's big, but not infinite. So what I need to do is stop the loop at some point. So this gather of a loop is going to read, remember that I return a Boolean of whether or not there is anything in the chunk. That's, I read the chunk or last, or I quit. Whatever got read is returned by the gather into this chunked input variable. I'm done. This is as much as it takes to call that chunking reader and produce all the chunks. Now, the problem here is this would read all of the data. I don't want to read all of the data. I want to read a thread's worth of data and then process it. I mean, I don't want to put the entire file in memory. I would just do it in one pass. So there's an operation called lazy. Lazy returns a promise object. When I try to populate some piece of that chunked input, that piece will be populated. So if I try and look at chunked input number, offset 9, 0 through 8 and 9 are all going to get populated, and then I can look at what I'm looking at. But until I actually look at a piece of this array, nothing happens. The gather never gets called. Lazy returns something that until you try to access it is emptiness. It's a flyweight if you're used to that idea. Anyone that's seen my thing on object trampoline will recognize that. The other problem is that the chunked input is eventually going to buffer all the input. I don't want it. It's a memory leak. Once I process these chunks, I want them to go away. So the cute thing here is lazy returns an object. It returns a promise object, which I can store inside of a value because the promise itself never changes. It returns things, but it doesn't change itself. This will take an infinite amount of data and never take up any more space than it takes to retrieve the next piece of it. So what I have really here is a chunk factory. I have created a chunk factory object with a lazy gather. If I wanted to generate objects of any type, this read chunk thing could return whatever it wants. The gather will just feed it into this chunked input, and the chunked input just becomes a factory for whatever I want to take inside that loop. This is completely generic. It doesn't know what it's reading. It doesn't know why or how. It just knows, hey, I'll give you back whatever's in the loop. So now one of the things, remember I had that little loop going every 5 seconds. I started the thread. This is how I feed it. I can say, look, read a chunk or tell me there's one more chunk. This is it. That keeps the watchdog fed. And that thread is out there in the background checking this value. And every so often it'll tell me, yeah, you got more data. Now I want to process this stuff. The way that you deal with that is a map. And again, I'm using the colon here instead of all the extra parens with braces around it. So map is going to read this one chunk at a time. It's going to take $_, it's going to pull it out of chunked input. Chunked input is going to call that lazy loop. The lazy loop's going to execute. It's going to read from the disk. It's going to break everything up. It's going to hand it back, and punk, map gets its $_. This thing called a slip. If you're used to Perl, the notion of context went away. Too many people found it too confusing. They didn't get it. No one liked it, so it went. So what happens here is I may have if you remember, when I saved this, when I did that take, I took an offset and a chunk. The offset is how I create row IDs because I store the offset of the start of each sequence. By flattening out $_ in each case, whatever got taken gets turned into 2 separate values. So process chunk doesn't have to know how the promise returned it. It knows it gets its offset as one argument and it gets the sequence as another. Now the result isn't assigned anywhere. So process chunk publishes everything and then the chunks just go away. They aren't accumulated anywhere. There's no memory leak from getting rid of them. This is actually quite compact. Now I promised you we'd do this in parallel, and here's where it happens. There's a loop, a hyper operator, Star Trek, I guess, takes a number of threads, and at the batch count, I can accumulate multiple $_ together. In this case, I want these to be one at a time. But I can say, I want this many threads running that map. Now, hyper's neat in that it will run everything, and until the first thing that got passed in, until that particular map finishes, it won't start another one. So you get your output in the same order as the input, as parallel as you can. If the first thing that goes in takes the longest, you'll have to wait for it to finish before you get more. But if the first, second, third, fourth, fifth go off, you can create 5 new threads waiting for the 6th. So it does all of that bookkeeping for ordering under the hood. The trick is it's slow because in my case, I don't care. Each of these chunks is an independent unit. So there's a thing called race that'll just dispatch as fast as it can. This is a generic processor for any kind of input. That $_ can be anything. It will be flattened out and passed down. The map doesn't know what it's processing. Chunk input doesn't know what it's returning. It just knows whatever the takes are, the gather is lazily handing them to me. And when it's done, it's done. I don't know how. This is a generic parallel dispatch mechanism. It'll work for anything. So basic ETL looks kind of like this. I take a bunch of inputs. They're a lazy gather. This take feeds the gather. The gather doesn't know how or why it's being taken. The take can return one thing or 10 or 20. Whenever it's done taking, it returns false. The threaded input fit, you can use hyper, you can use race. You take the number of threads and you map it. You flatten the thing back out again so that the thing that is reading and the thing that is consuming get the right number of arguments. They have to agree on that right count. But other than that, this is completely generic. It doesn't know what it's processing. And that makes it a lot faster to write. So it's basically the entire processor for this thing. The core of it is 2 lines of code. Now, for each of these chunks, I've got a bit of work to do because I've got to strip out all of these headers. And then I save the file offset for the start of the record along with the length of the actual sequence and its digest. Then in a separate file, I can save the offset and the sequence itself. So I can go back through. Uncompressing these takes so bloody long, it's easier to store a separate list with offsets and sequences than it is to try and read back through the original file to get them back again. So you think about this, I've got a bunch of these things. I could either read a chunk and then squash them out to the file system, or I can read them one by one and spit them out as I read them. So I'm going to show you both of them pretty quickly here before everyone goes completely to sleep. But the approach of reading them all at once, it's got some coding niceties. If you've got a lot of memory, it works pretty well. But in general, I found I could get better performance by writing things out one at a time and letting the system buffer it. So reading on the process side, remember I had that slip, the pipe $_ that took the offset and the chunk. And again, I assigned those to values. One of the reasons I use values in this code, it's not that I'm wedded to functional programming, but there's an interesting thing that by not wrapping these in variables, which are a container for a data value, I actually save time. And because each of these things is done millions of times, I can save 20 or 30 minutes of runtime by using values wherever I can in here. In this case, what I do is I take that $_ and put it into an offset and a chunk, and I return nothing. That nil is the equivalent of undef. It's the value that means there's nothing here. It's like a null in database land. So this just tells me that there's nothing going back, which again means that the map gets nothing, the map accumulates nothing, there's lots of nothing going on there. So the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to get back these files. So if you think about it, the offset that I started reading the chunk at is unique within the file. That makes a pretty nice quick way to create unique file names for each chunk. And it makes it pretty easy to relocate them. So if I'm looking later on and I want to find the sequence file that's got a particular offset in it, I can actually walk down the file system and grab the names. By using a %08x, they sort lexically, and they're fixed width, so they're easy to scan down later. This is something that should be really familiar. How many people here programmed C before in their life? I get to raise my hand. Lee? C, come on. Somebody's used C before?
Yes, I have.
Okay, yes. There are 2 of us left. I still have computer punch cards sitting using them as bookmarks. Well, the trick is if I use index, remember that index takes an offset. So what I can do here really, I look for a new line, which is the end of the header, and I look for a greater than. which thankfully is the end of the start of my next record, the end of my current one. Whatever is in between is a sequence. At that point, I take a substring, and this is another nice thing about Raku. In Perl, a lot of times, like if you do a substitute, you get the count of substitutions, which isn't all that useful. In this case, what I do is I take a substring, and I can say, for that substring, take all the new lines and strip them out globally. And what I get back is a string, which I assign to a sequence. Murmur hash is I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's not cryptographically secure, but it's very, very fast, and it's just fine for what I'm doing here. Between the length and the murmur hash, I get the number of collisions down to a reasonable amount of time, or a reasonable count in a short time. And again, here's another take, digest, sorry. Another take, what I take is an array of a start and a hash and a sequence. That's how I accumulate the input from these things. So what I've got now is I've taken the sequence and converted it to what I needed, and the gather just spits these out. Quoted word lists are a really nice thing. I think Perl introduced them, and everyone else has them now. They use greater than and less than. QWs are Perlish, angle brackets are quoted words. So what this does is it takes two files and it generates a name and a field and a buffer size. Now notice this list is 6 items long. It's a flat list of 6 items. But because my signature has 3 things on it, I'm going to select 3 things out of the list and 3 more things out of the list. So this makes it, these signatures make it really easy to process. And again, this signature isn't attached to the for loop. The signature is about the block. I can have an anonymous block with a signature that'll take 3 things at a time. One of the things I can do is adjust the buffer size. I've tried that. I included it here in the talk, and frankly, it doesn't gain me that much. So if I take a list and I join it, I get the file name. So I take a list, which is the stub I made out of that root and the offset, and I take the name, which is digest or sequence. I stick them together with a period. I create a file name out of it. Now notice, remember, when you guys were awake, I showed that I could do a dir, and I could find all the files that existed that look like this file name. If anything exists here, I've screwed up. So at this point, I say, fine, this is the file I think I want to open. If it exists, give up, I blew it. Now, what I do is I open it. Open doesn't return true or false. It returns a file handle. So in this case, I'm calling this file name, and that's an IO object. I created an IO up here. So I'm going to open it. I'm going to open it for write. The encoding is ASCII, which just means push the bytes through it. And I can create an output buffer with a specific size. 4K, 8K, I've tried various things.
Open doesn't return success or failure. Where does that come back?
If I give you false, you know you didn't get a file handle.
And do I get an error code that tells me why?
Yes, you can look at all sorts of things about what happened last. Instead of returning true or false, I return a file handle or false. And then you can ask the environment for all the errors that just happened.
All right, we'll learn that later. Thank you.
Yeah, if you think about it, I can return true or false. If I return true, you have a file handle. The file handle is true. The normal way, actually, I would usually do this is you say, remember that with operator? I use that to open something for. With open the file, yada, 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 points to file handle, do something. Else, I couldn't open the file. One of the cute things about this is this will leave. Remember, I had to close a file explicitly before? People who've seen Perl, there are begin blocks and end blocks and input. There's phases of the compilation. Raku has about 20 different phasers for entering a block, leaving a block, entering a sub, leaving a sub, compiling a sub, ending compilation of a sub, exiting the sub, cleaning up the sub when your program exits. One of which is leave, which says when I leave a block. So what this says is it's a promise. Here's a file handle that will, when I hit the leave phase of this block, I will execute close on it. This is a self-closing file that is lexically scoped. Did that make sense to people? Anyone who's breathing, just say hello. Hello. Oh, there we go. So the will leave is neat. These actually are neat because I can have something that the last time the subroutine runs, it will clean up side effects of the subroutine. I can have, there's all kinds of different, you know, depending on which block I put the leave in, there are phasers, again, for leaving the program, entering the program, errors. There's a long, long list of things you can do with phasers, and it's kind of neat. Star Trek aside.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So the will leave, the FH will leave, does that mean when FH goes out of scope, the close run?
No. It says that when the block FH is declared in, hits its leave in the block phaser. You can think of this as pushing onto a queue associated with this block. That when the block exits, it will execute all of these little anonymous subs that it's accumulated. It's almost like a gather and take. I've told the block, when you exit, your leave phaser has one more thing in its queue, which is to close this file handle. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
It's the thing about it.
Concept, but it's kind of done by the caller. Really
well, if it were Perl, the file handle would go out of scope and close itself. So what it basically has is in Perl, the file handle object has a destroy that closes itself. In Raku, the file handles don't. They can last longer than that. So what ends up happening is you tell it where you want it to leave. So the leave is attached. I take a closure that manages the file handle and I attach it to the block. What's good about that is I can leave the block by any mechanism I choose, and this phaser is going to get called.
Yeah, and I get that because FH is a MI. It's local to this scope.
Right.
What happens if you accidentally or whatever or on purpose take the file handle with you when you leave? What happens when you try to pass out?
When you leave this block, it's whenever the execution, whenever the instruction counter gets to the end of this block, and you leave the scope of this block, file will close.
But if you had a take, then the guy who does a gather is going to get a closed file handle.
But then I wouldn't put the will leave close on it. I'd leave it up to that person to close the file handle.
Yeah, okay. You just have to know what you're doing, and you have to not shoot yourself in the foot. Okay.
Well, the point of this is if I want the bookkeeping for the life of the file handle to be managed by the block the file handle is declared in, I would use this. Because then I do it and I don't have to think about it again. If this were a factory that were opening the file handle, I would leave it up to I would pass it back as part of a larger object that knew that it had to close this thing in its own destructor.
Yeah, opening and closing file handles is one problem. The other one is malloking and freeing up.
Sure. And, I could say will end with close. So I can have a file handle that won't close itself until the end of the program. If that were lowercase end, this is a file handle that knows it needs to be cleaned up gracefully on program exit. So if this file handle were declared at the very beginning of the file and I used it for logging, and I was writing all of my logs, I could say this thing will exit.
And flush and write before it dies.
And flush and write and do all that stuff at end of program. And the point to that would be yes, Raku will close and flush all the file handles when it exits, but by putting it on a specific phaser, I control it and it's not done in whatever J-random order the garbage collector decides to do it in. It gives me control. And if you look at the phases for Raku, there are 20 or so of them. I could have a file handle that was only open during compilation that was there to record compilation warnings. I could have something that was only there during start of execution, and it was going to open a state file that was going to stay open for as long as, you know, it took to complete one thing. Whatever that thing is, I can attach closing this file to it. It gives you very fine-grained control over the life of things. Most of the time, if what you want is a file handle that lasts for the life of a block, this works just perfectly. But then what I'm going to do is...
Hey, Stephen?
Yeah.
Sometimes
everyone's going to sleep, I know.
No. When someone is asking you a question, people are hearing a lot of echo, so you might want to turn your mute your microphone when someone's talking to you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually, I don't know how to do that, but I can't get to the mic. Is there a lot of background noise from here?
You sound like you're kind of talking in a cave. I mean, there's a background echo to your room.
Yeah, that may be it.
But I don't know what causes it. When your speaker is hearing us talk, and then your microphone is picking up what your speaker is broadcasting.
Oh, okay. That we can fix by taking output devices. You know, playback, system sounds. Somebody say something.
Something.
Test.
Did you guys hear it in my microphone?
That seems to have fixed it.
That seems to have fixed it.
I just turned down the volume on my speakers. If you ask me a question, you'll have to scream, but does that help? I guess. Okay,
we'll have to hear some people asking you questions, but it seems like it might help. Yep.
Well, if you didn't get a lot of echo when you were just talking, then it worked. Okay, so the last thing is, notice the file handle at the end here where I say the file handle. A file handle in a stringy context prints out the path to the file. I thought that was neat. Parallel writes. So the next thing is, you know, I showed you that I could do this for loop. If I do a start, I can write all of the block you just saw by sticking a start in front of it. I can threadify the writing. So now that happens in parallel too. That's one of the neat things about accumulating the data first and then writing it out, as I can parallelize those writes. And that really depends on whether or not the machine is heavy duty enough to handle multiple threads doing multiple writes at the same time. But again, the side of it is buffering all the sequence data, it uses a lot of memory. And it's a neat trick if the closure or the metadata we're processing is complicated, or it has to get passed in, or I'm using a closure to do the writing, because it makes the processing a bit more generic. But there is another alternative. What I can do is open two files on the way in, store them, and then use them to write the data for each record. So that's what I'll do here. I have a couple of files. I'm going to skip the whole thing with the buffer size. So I get a name and a field. So I take a file, I open it, die if there's an error, and what I do is I return, and again, you can see, there's a slip down here. I return a flattened out open file and a field, which is the offset within the data array that I'm going to print for that file. So now I do a loop, and for the files, I start, it's the same code accumulates that array of a start and a hash and a sequence, It's just every time I go through the loop, I iterate the files. I take the file handle, I take a field. The array hands off 2 items because there are 2 things in the signature for this block, and I do a say of the starting and either the start and the hash or the start of the sequence. The other trick is then at the end of my block, I can't use that will leave on close because it's the file handles have to outlast the block they were created in. So at that point, I have to explicitly close them, but that's easy to do. I just take the file handle and field and just close it. Now, depending on my block size, you remember, if the block size is, say, 128K, and I'm doing 128 gig file, I'm going to have, when I'm running this, I usually have 500,000 files on the disk. XFS can handle it. I mean, I get a lot of small files. But at some point, the small files work, but you might get annoyed by them. If you're using ext4 or some other file systems, they may not like having 2 million inodes used up. So I can recycle the files by thread. One of the things is, remember Twidgels, when I'm in a thread, $thread is a dynamic variable that's created for me that describes the thread. It knows, among other things, the thread number. So I can open a file for append, and each time I get into a thread, I can append onto a file that's thread specific. And that gives me what, in this, like the way I run this, usually 40 or 64 ways or 72 ways parallel. It'll give me 72 files that are many, many megabytes each. The opening for append is slow. If I can get away with the smaller files, I get better performance with it, and it's easier to post-process the data. So that's what I ended up doing. But things like that thread object make it so easy to thread things in Raku because you can start a thread, pause it, make it dependent on another thread. You can get the thread.id quickly, and it's there in the language when you need it. So there's one thing I wanted to do was log progress. I'm going to go really quickly at this point. There's a thing on CPAN in the Raku part of the world that I wrote that dumps out whatever Linux will tell you about your memory and resource usage. Now, one of the things is, and I think this was stolen from Python. I don't know who came up with this idea first. If you put bare curly braces inside an interpolating quote, you will interpolate the code inside of it. So at that point, if I have something I declare as a constant, I can put it in curly braces in an interpolating quotes, and I'll get the value back. So if you remember this gather that was returning things, remember the plus chunks? Another thing I can do is every so often I can dump out how much data I've processed and estimate my processing rate. And this interval is usually about every 2 to 32 bytes. I mean, it's 4 gig is actually not that large in comparison to the file size I'm processing. So every so often, I dump out a progress message. And I could have set that as $foo. I could use value. I could have written this in just about this entire thing easily using values only. I could have used variables for all of it. And the great thing about Raku, you can mix these. You can mix functional, declarative, iterative, whatever kind of code works. I can have a character string down here that has dollar chunks and curlies with the rate around it. If I'm updating the variable, plus chunks, I use a dollar chunks, fine. If I've got something that it's a little bit faster and I care about the speed and I care about not accidentally modifying it, then I can do it with curly, I can use that. The request garbage collection doesn't do much right now, but hopefully it'll do more in the future. So the way I run this, it's on it's a 4 CPU Opteron system. I got 48 cores total on 4 CPUs with 128 gig. So I can get a lot done. What I tried was using 64 threads with race with different chunk sizes, from 64K up to 8 meg. And you think about it, I'd like to minimize my wall clock. My system time is hopefully a little bit smaller because it's not really contributing to the write. If I look at my user time over my wall clock time, that's a pretty good estimate of how much of the CPU I'm using to get something done. And in case, in the end, really, if I look at my processing rate, just the number of bytes that I pumped through this thing, the total file size divided by the seconds that it took, that's the best measure, really, of whether I'm getting things done quickly. If it were a shared system, managing the user and wall clock becomes important, so I don't get thrown off of it because I'm hogging the machine. Now, one other thing, too, my total time is going to include my housekeeping. That cleanup loop at the beginning is part of it. I'm creating, in some cases, 75,000 files. It takes a non-trivial amount of time to delete them all. So I include that, and that helps measure some of the trade-offs between my file size and the inode count and all the rest of it. Now, one thing is More, which is the back-end processor for Raku. It's a generic thing. It doesn't know about Raku. More is, the original goal with Matter was to have Raku run on the Java virtual machine. And the problem was that the Java virtual machine was so antiquated and so hard to change and so resistant to modification, we couldn't get done what we wanted to. So somebody just wrote something from scratch. It's called More. If I have a degree of 1,000, it's not going to dispatch 1,000 threads. It's going to max out at the point where it can get work done. So even if I set this up to 64 or 72 threads, usually on this machine, it doesn't get much more than about 60. Which is neat to know, because if you're using this in a shared environment, you can safely set a degree fairly high, and you're not going to eat the machine for breakfast. So looking at this thing, if I use 2 to the 17 for my chunk size, looking through the middle of it, I can get about 20 megabytes per second through it. And, my system time actually, using that first approach where I accumulate the data and then spit it out into 2 files in parallel, you notice I've got 36 cores active, which is as many as I gave the thing. So I'm keeping the machine running full time, and the system time isn't very high. So if I go through the approach of spitting all of it out at once, that actually works pretty well. If I go up to 18, the larger chunk, I do get a bit better. After this, I'm still keeping 36 cores active, but as you get up to 20, 24, the accumulating that much data with all those takes before I write them, that memory management starts to slow it down, and I don't get much above 21. If I use the immediate writes, funny thing you notice, I'm keeping fewer cores active because I've got more system time. I'm blocking more of it, but I get more throughput. The system just does a better enough job. And you'll notice, yes, with 2 to the 20, the chunk counts get, there's one file. This is why I get 40 or 70,000 files in the output directory. I'm not joking. This output, this 70 is, doing every 2 to the 20 over 2 to the 32 outputs. But I'm getting 23 meg, which is better, even with the higher system count. With 2 to the 24, I get about 25 meg, which is about where the system peaks out. Again, I've got more idle time. I'm only using 32 of the cores full time. My system time is actually relatively high, but I get better throughput because I'm not using as much of the time for the takeover hit. So anyway, again, as one of my other talks, size does matter, unfortunately. And the approach using the immediate writes with 2 separate files is a little bit faster. But I would say, if I can get 25 meg pushed through this, that's actually better than I can do with Perl or C. It's a lot better than I've seen anyone do who's trying to process the same thing. Part of the challenge is getting it done faster with Python or Raku or anything. Perl, I can get a bit better speed out of, but it does take a lot more work in the code. And, Raku's, I think the syntax for doing this is pretty readable. The gather and take make it really easy to accumulate data without having to worry about exactly where it's returned. You take it where you need to. The given and when make it easy to make decisions that take things, that put things into a gather. The lazy loops make it easy to prepare the data and not have to worry about semaphore arrays and who's on what and blocking and all the rest of it. All of that stuff is just taken care of under the hood with the lazy and the promise. So I found that, I originally didn't like the signatures very much. I used to Perl or C where you can coerce things easily, but generally I found the programming overhead with the signatures in Raku is pretty low because they can automatically coerce things. You can take lists and get the right number of things out of them. And if you don't want to use them, if you've got a place where you don't, you can actually just shift things off of that underscore. You can write Raku that looks almost exactly like Perl 5. So you can do it whichever way you prefer. You saw that one thing that had a points to nil. It was a closure on $input. I didn't pass anything into it. It just read the data and didn't return anything. It just did the takes. There weren't any returns in it, or excuse me, returns a Boolean. The real work was done by the take, pulling the offset and the sequences and everything else. The Boolean was just returned at the end to say keep going or not. And that's where it's nice. I don't have to worry about returning funny things and buffering them all. The gather and take does it all for me. If you look this thing up online, there's a bunch of extra Raku. There's Perl 5 to 6 in a nutshell. If you look at the guides, there are how to program Raku for, I lost count after about 15 or 20 different languages. Haskell, Python, Perl, C, Shell. There are a lot of tutorials under the language section. That concurrency, if you're writing something that doesn't handle massive amounts of data like this, and you just want to be able to read for something, spit it out to a channel, have channels on multiple hosts, just grab things when they can, there is a structure for that involves a trivial amount of code. It's not designed for processing this kind of volume. And that's it. You're finally free. Did I manage to chase everyone off or no?
Still here.
Okay, well, at least Gary's here, so.
We're just still processing ourselves. We don't have that many cores in our head.
Well, I pointed out at the beginning, you're not supposed to memorize this while I'm going along, right? It was just to show people these are some of the kinds of things that are available.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to, this thing's online at SlideShare. So if you look me up on SlideShare, it's the only talk on SlideShare with hypers and gathers and takes and oh my in the title.
The features are pretty cool, but the syntax of Raku is kind of difficult for us to get through if we're not familiar with it.
Well, it's funny because I started out not knowing any of it, and the things like the gather and take. You put a gather and a loop, a gather of for, a gather of what, a gather of anything, whatever is inside of the take. So let's go to that gather. Done. There's the syntax is a lot more free form and actually rather forgiving in most cases, and especially things like the gather and take, because if you write something that does a lot of this heavy duty processing, the bugaboo most of it is finding ways to return the values. So I could return an array, but the array has to be not defined if I'm done with the data. So then I have to get something, and is the array empty? And you spend a lot of time just checking what you got back. If you look in Raku, I can say with open a file points to a variable name, which is actually the way R does it. And if it's defined, I've got a usable file handle. Use it. Otherwise, else, it isn't. We're done. So most of the structures, most of the constructs are pretty much the kind, they're designed to work the way you use code. There's a lot of, if you read through a lot of it, I turned off my screen share. I figured people were done staring at it. I apologize. But that's, there's a lot of 20/20 hindsight involved in this. One of the people who, Damian Conway has been involved in Perl for a long time. He was one of the people on the C++ ANSI committee that was screaming bloody murder. No, we're killing ourselves. And so this was his chance to say, what were the mistakes we put into C++? So, it does have a lot of really nice things that it does, because we've seen how to not stub our toes. If that made any sense.
Most of the modern languages these days are responses to C++.
Yeah, well, Python was a response to Perl. But the, Fortran was a response to cards. I don't know. But the languages are getting better because we've got a longer window of hindsight to figure out what it is that it takes to make a language that works. If you look at Python 3, yes, local variables make a difference. People, even, ECMAScript 7, JavaScript is starting to look like a real language. People are just, one of the things about Perl, people say that a lot of bad Perl code was written. Nobody knew how to write dynamic code in the 1990s. It hadn't existed before. In the same way that a lot of really bad C was written in the 1970s. Nobody really knew how to write well-organized C back then. So we've learned a lot. And I think the language, this particular language, reflects a lot of that. It's kind of neat. Although after 10 years, it does leave us having to create Perl 7 is the next generation of Perl, because it is a completely different animal. But if anyone's interested, there's a group of bioinformaticists on the West Coast that wanted to try and get together a group to learn Raku. One of the things, this has nothing to do with, Raku has got built-in grammars. Raku uses itself to parse itself. So the notion of nested grammar objects, grammars inheriting from grammars, grammars dispatching, depending on what they're parsing, is built into the language. So for handling really, really messy data, you can do it much more declaratively in Raku, which is why they were interested in it. And you can do it faster. Was that interesting? Did anyone give a damn about what I just said?
Oh, yes. Very interesting.
Yeah, Steven. It is a long talk, but it's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, actually, the version I did for FOSDEM, we had to record our own talks. And going at full speed, I could cover it in 33 minutes.
Yeah, I think I think for our group, without that good of a background in Perl, for many of us, it took us a while to start picking up on some of the concepts of the race conditions, the chunks, and why this was going to be useful.
Chunks, well, the whole chunks isn't Perl. Chunks was, again, that's how you used to process data in C. You'd read a bunch of 4K buffers, and you'd accumulate 4K buffers into a larger buffer, and then you'd find the end of string. The R index trick of taking the last thing off and saving it for the next one, I learned that in C in the 1980s. Again, you can write Raku that looks a lot like C. R index and find me the next thing after that thing with the index with an offset. That's C programming.
Yeah.
The dollar signs are taken straight out of Perl. They're sigils. But no, Raku is a different language than Perl. A lot of Perl people don't really like it because it isn't Perly enough. But I think it strikes a rather nice balance between being able to specify everything and having to specify everything. You don't have to write, if you have a subroutine that's quick and dirty, you don't need to write a signature for it if you don't want to. Just don't bother. You can go both ways. So it gives you the flexibility to write lightweight stuff easily. In this case, I did a lot of that because I'm processing enough data. This thing takes 6 hours to run as it is. My electricity bill goes up when I run this. Hey, you take 48 cores, a four CPU Opteron thing. I mean, the fans alone running at full speed eat enough power to dim the lights. But I did a lot of this to really optimize the performance. That was why I use constants. They're a nice programming construct because you step on your feet less often, but they're faster. I don't have to unwrap a variable every time I access it. If I've got something I'm going to access, a few billion times, a 10,000th of a second adds up noticeably over that. So that's where a lot of the programming here came from.
When you include external packages or modules, I forgot was it called include or use or import?
It's like Perl. You use a module.
Use. So those modules are what? They are .pms or they're .rakus?
.rakus. There is a standard for it, but yeah, they're .raku.
And they live in user share, Raku, something, whatever.
Well, the way Raku works, Raku's interesting. You brought it up, so I get to describe it. One of the interesting things, and a complaint people have always had about Perl, is you can't have two versions of the same library installed at the same time. So, and this is a classic problem. You get, you compile something and one uses this version of libreadline and another uses that version of libreadline, and all of a sudden you can't run, you can't recompile something. So one of the interesting things, Raku is a compiled language like Perl, like Python, and it compiles to a bytecode that is saved in a local scratch space that's all done in hexadecimal. Part of that is that the accessor for Raku can specify the version. So yeah, the source version, the source stuff is stored where you can see it, but when you actually install it, it's pre-compiled and stored away in a file system database where you really have to know how to find it. The interesting thing about that, though, is I can actually load two different versions of the same library in the same Raku program and use different versions of the library in different places at the same time.
Wow. Whoa, say that again, please.
Hey, I have a Raku module and I fix a bug, but in fixing the bug, I made your life harder. Okay. And you've got some code that you've got this thing that's got 6 subroutines in it, and 3 of them benefit from my newer library, and 3 of them you don't want to update because you depend on that bug for the way you did something. You can put the 2 of them in, and you can say, in 3 of those subs, you can say, because uses everything in Raku is lexically scoped, you can go into 3 subroutines and say, use this version of that module. And the other 3, you can say, use a different version of that module. And Raku will load and associate the correct version and the correct entry points for anything you use to the module that's defined for that version in the subroutine that uses it.
Okay. Okay.
You can have different authors of the same module. If two of us have different ways of having live read line, I can have a read line and you can have a read line. The author is part of the definition. You can take one half of your program using my version of read line. You can have another module that uses a different author's read line because they like it better the way that works, and Raku will account for it. You can even have different versions of different authors' versions of something in different parts of your code if you really, really want to. Because the author and the version are part of the definition of the module name.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons it took 10 years to write this. It is.
I have a question about overall package management. Do you have the ability, I know how CPAN works, and I know how Cargo works in Rust, and I know how Ruby Gems works.
If you understand CPAN, you understand Raku's system. It's based on CPAN. Okay. It lives on CPAN. It uses pause for the uploads. There is a utility called ZEF, Z-E-F, I forgot what it stands for, that will do the installs for you.
Ah, I see. That's what I was trying to get to. Is basically
there's no CPAN. There's a ZEF installer.
Is there something like a package.json file or something along those lines where I can say?
Yeah, okay. Well, if it depends. If you're writing the things, there's a really neat utility that validates the fact that you've got a new version, validates the fact that you have a version in your changes file for the current version. It will check it in or out of Git for you. It'll stuff it up onto the repository. You type this thing, it goes through its 12-step cycle, and bang, your module's on CPAN. As far as installing it, the tool of choice is ZEF, Zebra Echo Foxtrot, and you type ZEF space and a module name. If you have ZEF and a version and a module name with a user or a module name and a version, it will install the specific.
What I was trying to get to was, let's say I've got, Raku Project 1, and way over here completely differently I have Raku Project 2, right?
Yeah.
And maybe they've got different, modules or different versions of the same module or something like that. In other words, can I have a project-dependent install file?
Sure. Well, you have two choices. If they have different versions of the same module, the different people can just specify the version of the module they want, and Raku will load the appropriate version for them. There's nothing. One of the problems you got, for example, with Perl and the file system organization of it is once you had the name of a module, you could only have one version of that module in the repository at one time because the version number wasn't part of it. In Raku, the version number is part of the definition. So you can have one repository, one library of Raku, and you can have two people using different versions of the same module out of it. No harm.
Yeah, okay. I just, you said using ZEF, and I just thought that would it do a local install to the project. But you're saying it does a global install, but then
well, you can tell ZEF to install things in a local directory. You could have two different Raku library repositories on your system, one for each project. Or you could have one large one and just have both of them reference different versions out of the common repository. If somebody wants to stay with the old version, they just put that version number in their code and they'll be using that version of the module. That having that old version doesn't prevent you from installing the new version. And in fact, it's nice for testing because you can specify the version, upgrade. You're still running, if you specify the versions, installing the new version doesn't mean you're using it. You can go to your QA site, up the version, and run stuff without the versions, run the most recent of everything. And if nothing breaks, you can go to your production stuff and up the version numbers you're explicitly using there. But it makes it easier because if you care which version you're using, you can specify it and just get it. And even if you're specifying it, somebody installing the new version doesn't overwrite yours and require you to use the new one. You just have to specify the version of the old one that you still want to use. Did that make sense the way I said it?
Yeah, yeah, I got it.
This question is not about the content of the talk, but somebody just asked. We no longer see the grid with the talking faces, and it's. Does anybody know why that changed? It was.
I stopped sharing my screen. Was that bad?
That seems to be. No, it's not because you stopped sharing your screen. It's because everyone stopped talking.
No, it's because there's no video. If nobody's showing video, the group goes away. If somebody has video open,
okay.
Yeah. Ah, okay.
Video can either be a camera or a screen share.
Cute. I don't think anyone cares about seeing me. So,
Zoom sucks.
Well, and like I said, the New York Perl mongers, they're looking at switching to using Google's meetup thingy. And we tried it out the other day, and it actually worked better than Zoom. So I don't know. Anyway, like I said, did people find that interesting? I mean, hopefully I can convince somebody to at least look at Raku. It's got a learning curve.
There were some interesting features. All of the additional syntax seems to be an intellectual overhead to utilize those features. But
well, I mean, really, if you look at what I had there, I showed you what with something assigned to something, a block with an else. There's gather and take. You gather a loop, and inside the loop, you take whatever you need. There was a map with a race applied in front of it. That was 90% of the syntax of the entire thing I showed you. Oh, and the given and when, the switch. I mean, other than understanding what index and R-index and substring do, there was most of the syntax in there was not much. That's why I figured it out. That was one of the things that.
5 question.
Any limitations to the variable length?
Hang on. I've got my. Let me up the volume here for once. I couldn't hear you.
Are there any limitations to the length of the variables?
In Perl 5? Yeah, I think there is, but it might be something like a kilobyte. You can make horrifically long. In Raku, the variable names can be obscenely long, and they can be any sort of UTF-8 you like. You're not restricted to words and underscores. As a matter of fact, one thing, because people get sick of typing underscores, is people who program Raku tend to use dashes a lot of the times because it's less work to type. If there are a bunch of operators in the language, like the hyper operator that runs things in parallel, that are actually the Guillemot, the double angle bracket. Most of them have ASCII, multi-character ASCII alternatives, but the actual language is written in UTF-8. You could write Raku in Chinese, and it wouldn't care. It wouldn't know the difference because it's all UTF-8. And yes, people have written stuff in Klingon by now. But as far as I know, in Perl, you can make the length of a variable is, because the variable is just a key and a hash, it could be up to kilobytes. I mean, long enough that even if you generated them, you wouldn't run out. And the same is true of Raku. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, I'd say before everyone keels over,
let me fork the subject of the question for just a moment. Stephen, you had mentioned earlier you had a question about Zoom, and I'm trying to remember exactly how that question went.
It's a pain in the butt, but other than that.
It was the applications. You couldn't get the application, the Zoom application loaded on your system.
Right. It's library version hell.
Okay. And which distro are you trying to load it onto?
Gen 2.
Gen 2, okay.
And because I have a dynamic system, this stuff's all compiled, it all just works with itself. Zoom is based on a particular Debian release that's, more than a year old now. And if you don't have whatever ancient collection of libraries they want, you're toast. So Zoom sometimes installs for me and sometimes it doesn't, because I'm not running all the same versions of all the same libraries, including glibc that Ubuntu was whenever they compiled it on Ubuntu. And because they don't release it as source, I can't compile it with the current collection of SOs that I've got. There was one time I tried to load
virtual machines and containers.
I'm not going to bother. You know what? If it gets that bad, I run Zoom on my phone or on a tablet.
What I do is I load it, Zoom through the browser. I don't bother with that downloadable.
I know, and there's sometimes you can't do that. There's times when it requires using the app. And for those times, I use my phone. But anyway, I've got to go make dinner, or my wife's going to kill me. I'm on the East Coast, so it's 10:15 here. If honest question, do people find that interesting?
Very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was. If anyone wants to know more about it, I can come back and do something else. Gary knows I'm always available. But
we always thank you for all the great insights.
Thank you. I try. Anyway, have a pleasant night, gentlemen. I'm going to go try and feed people.
Thank you very much. That was Stephen Lembark. Stephen Lembark.
Thank you for staying awake through all of it. I know it's a lot of syntax.
And this was for the sake of the recording, this was the
Hypers and Gathers and Takes. Oh my.
Hypers and Gathers and Takes. Oh my. It was a talk about the Raku language. This is Wednesday, March the 10th, 2021. And this was the monthly St. Louis Unix Users Group meeting, SLUUG. And with that, I guess we can keep the questioning open, or questions, comment. What we'll do is, if anybody wants to get anything else on the recording, quickly ask the question or the comment now. Otherwise, we'll stop the recording and people can just keep chit-chatting until whenever.
Whatever. Have a good one.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Anybody have anything they want to get on the recording, or think it may be a question that or comment that generates enough conversation that you want it recorded?
I think it's time we shut down the recording.
Sounds like it. So recording's going off. Everybody can stay on.